Well, hey there, everyone. It's Mrs. Estero here with another First Chapter Friday. Well, February is approaching, or it is already here, depending on when you're viewing this. And February is chock full of many holidays and special days. In my opinion, the most important thing that we do in February is recognize the contributions of African Americans to our country and what we call Black History Month. So, in honor of that, and in honor of trying to bring you some quality literature to reflect that, I would like to introduce the book Chains to You by Laurie Halse Anderson. This book has won many awards and is very highly acclaimed, one award of which is the National Book Award finalist. So, I am excited to introduce it to you. Before I start, though, I just want to make sure that you have your First Chapter Friday freebie. It is a printable. It is available for free in the video description. If you print out a bunch of these and keep them in a reading notebook, you can refer back to them when it's time for your next read and see what you would be most interested in. So I'd like to tell you a little bit about the book before we begin. The book doesn't have a book jacket per se. It's not a hardcover book. So I'm going to read to you off of the Goodreads description so that you have a little bit of an idea what it's about. As the Revolutionary War begins, 13-year-old Isabel wages her own fight for freedom. Promised freedom upon the death of their owner, she and her sister, Ruth, in a cruel twist of fate, became the property of a malicious New York City couple, the Locktons, who have no sympathy for the American Revolution and even less for Ruth and Isabel. When Isabel meets Curzon, a slave with ties to the Patriots, he encourages her to spy on her owners, who know details of British plans for invasion. She is reluctant at first, but when the unthinkable happens to Ruth, Isabel realizes her loyalty is available to the bidder who can provide her with her freedom. Okay? By the way, this is part of a series. It is the first in a series, and it is something that I will tell you, book clubs in my 6th grade classroom love this book. When they got into it, they absolutely loved it. So let's take a listen to the first chapter of Chains. Chapter 1 takes place on Monday, May 27th, 1776. Youth is the seed time of good habits as well in nations as in individuals, and that is quoted from Thomas Paine in the pamphlet Common Sense, where Thomas Paine basically felt that it made common sense to break free from British rule at the time of the Revolution, and he tried to convince others of that. The best time to talk to ghosts is just before the sun comes up. That's when they can hear us true, Mama said. That's when ghosts can answer us. The eastern sky was peach-colored, but a handful of lazy stars still blinked in the west. It was almost time. "May I run ahead, sir?" I asked. Pastor Weeks sat at the front of his squeaky wagon, with old Ben next to him, the mule's reins loose in his hands. The pine coffin that held Miss Mary Finch, wearing her best dress with her hair washed clean and comb bounced in the back when the wagon wheels hit a rut. My sister, Ruth, sat next to the coffin. Ruth was too big to carry, plus the pastor knew about her peculiar manner of being, so it was the wagon for her and the road for me. Old Ben looked to the east and gave me a little nod. He knew a few things about ghosts, too. Pastor Weeks turned around to talk to Mr. Robert Finch, who rode his horse a few lengths behind the wagon. "The child wants to run ahead," Pastor explained to him. "She has kin buried there. Do you give leave for a quick visit?" Mr. Roberts' mouth tightened like a rope pulled taut. He had showed up a few weeks earlier to visit Miss Mary Finch, his aunt and only living relation. He looked around her tidy farm, listened to her ragged, wet cough, and moved in. Miss Mary wasn't even cold on her deathbed when he helped himself to the coins in her strong box. He hurried along her burying, too, most improper. He didn't care that the neighbors would want to come around with cakes and platters of cold meat and drink ale to the rememory of Miss Mary Finch of Tow, Rhode Island. He had to get on with things, he said. I stole a look backward. Mr. Robert Finch was filled up with trouble from his dirty boots to the brim of his scraggly hat. "Please, sir," I said. "Go then," he said. "But don't tarry. I've much business today." I ran as fast as I could. I hurried past the stone fence that surrounded the white graveyard to the split rail fence that marked our ground and stopped outside the gate to pick a handful of chilly violets wet with dew. The morning mist twisted and hung low over the field. No ghosts yet, just ash trees and maples lined up in a mournful row. I entered. Mama was buried in the back, her feet to the east, her head to the west. Someday I would pay the stone carver for a proper marker for her name on it. Dinah, wife of Cuff, mother of Isabel and Ruth. For now, there was a wooden cross and a gray rock the size of a dinner plate lying flat on the ground in front of it. We had buried her the year before, when the first roses bloomed. "Smallpox is tricky," Miss Mary Finch said to me when Mama died. "There's no telling who'll it take." The pox had left Ruth and me with scars like tiny stars scattered on our skin. It took Mama home to our Maker. I looked back at the road. Old Ben had slowed the mules to give me time. I knelt down and set the violets on the grave. "It's here, Mama," I whispered, "the day you promised, but I need your help. Can you please cross back over for just a little bit?" I stared without blinking at the mist, looking for the curve of her back or the silhouette of her head wrapped in a pretty kerchief. A small flock of robins swooped out of the maple trees. "I don't have much time," I told the grass-covered grave. "Where do you want us to go? What should we do?" The mist swirled between the tall grass and the low-hanging branches. Two black butterflies danced through a cloud of bugs and disappeared. Chickadees and barn swallows called overhead. Whoa! Old Ben stopped the wagon next to the open hole near the iron fence, then climbed down and walked to where Nehemiah, the gravedigger, was waiting. The two men reached for the coffin. "Please, Mama," I whispered urgently. "I need your help." I squinted into the ash grove where the mist was heaviest. No ghosts, nothing. I've been making like this for near a year. No matter what I said or where the sun and moon and the stars hung, Mama never answered. Maybe she was angry because I'd buried her wrong. I'd heard stories of old country burials with singers and dancers, but I wasn't sure what to do, so we just dug a hole and said a passel of prayers. Maybe Mama's ghost was lost and wandering because I didn't send her home the right way. The men set Miss Mary's coffin on the ground. Mr. Robert got off his horse and said something I couldn't hear. Ruth stayed in the wagon, her bare feet curled up under her skirt and her thumb in her mouth. I reached in the pocket under my apron and took out the oat cake. It was in 2 pieces with honey smeared between them. The smell made my stomach rumble, but I didn't dare nibble. I picked up the flat rock in front of the cross and set the offering in the hollow under it. Then I put the rock back and sat still, my eyes closed tight to keep the tears inside my head where they belonged. I could smell the honey that had dripped on my hands, the damp ground under me, and the salt of the ocean. I could hear cows mooing in a far pasture and bees buzzing in a nearby clover patch. If she would just say my name, just once. "Girl," Mr. Roberts shouted. "You there, girl." I sniffed, opened my eyes, and wiped my face on my sleeve. The sun had popped up in the east like a cork and was burning through the morning mist. The ghost had all gone to the ground. I wouldn't see her today either. He grabbed my arm and pulled me roughly to my feet. "I told you to move," Mr. Roberts snarled at me. "Apologies, sir," I said, wincing with pain. He released me with a shove and pointed to the cemetery where they buried white people. "Go pray for her that owned you, girl." And that is the end. Chapter 1 of Chains. This book gets very involved. You're going to be rooting so much for these 2 sisters. Some of it is, of course, upsetting based on the subject matter, but it is filled with strength and hope and a really good reminder of our African American history. So I hope that you enjoyed it. If you have any titles that you would like to see featured on my channel, be sure to drop a comment in the comments section. Until then, I'll see you next Friday, and happy reading.